Hey friends, it's Alyssa. Today I want to share with you some books that I recently read. My last recently read check-in was almost 2 months ago, and I've read about 15 books since then. 3 of those books are included in my Asian Readathon wrap-up, so I'm not going to rehash them here, but those books were Kitchen and Moonlight Shadow, The Joy Luck Club, and The Collective Schizophrenia. I loved all of these books, especially The Joy Luck Club. I gave that one 5 stars and the other 2 4 stars, so I definitely recommend checking out that wrap up as well as these excellent Asian authors. As for the other 12 books that I've read since my last video, I'm just going to ramble on about some books now and we'll see how many we can fit in. I'm going to at least start off talking about these in chronological order, which does mean we're starting on a bit of a low note for me. Wongborn by Joe Baker. I didn't really like it much, and it's been hard for me to figure out exactly why. I think in the end I just found it really unremarkable, and I thought that something more interesting could have been done with the premise. This book follows the story of the servants of the Bennet family from Pride and Prejudice by Jane Austen. This book, more than anything, has actually provoked sort of a discussion for me, or like a thought process for me, of what I expect of retellings. And I think that something like fairy tale or myth retellings is sort of a different category than taking like a new take on another book, a work of literature, and looking at a different angle or exploring the stories of other characters that are in the peripheral, such as the servants of the Bennet house. I think that perhaps part of my disappointment was my expectations, and I don't know exactly what those were, which makes this confusing, but in retrospect I do think that I expected, or that I at least have felt, that even a retelling which is sort of paired to another work of literature, if it can't stand on its own, then it's not a good book. And I don't know if that actually, like, that idea actually holds water, but in my mind, at least before reading this book, I thought, like, you know, heaven forbid, if Pride and Prejudice had never existed, would Longbourn still be a good book? And it's hard for me to, like, definitively give my answer, but I think that there are structural elements about the book, or else motivations of the characters, that don't actually make as much sense if you were to separate that book from Pride and Prejudice. And so for that reason, I think the book would be weaker if you were to decontextualize it that way. However, it's not meant to be decontextualized, so perhaps that's something that's like really unfair of me to do. Altogether, regardless of all of that, I, for the most part, just didn't find this book very interesting, and I was bored. So in the end of the day, like, that's the most important part. But it has made me interested in examining my expectations of literary retellings. Perhaps, like, these retellings just aren't for me. I don't know, but I am planning on revisiting Pride and Prejudice, and I'm grateful because I think that Longbourn did provoke a desire for that as well. The next book I read is The Cost of Living, a working autobiography by Deborah Levy. It is an autobiography, and the author is transitioning to living on her own with her 2 daughters in the wake of a divorce. It's mostly about just sort of getting on her feet in London. For the most part, I haven't really lingered on this book much. I haven't continued to think much about it, and while the writing was really beautiful, I don't think I feel compelled enough to stick with the author and to read her other books. I do think she's a talented author, but altogether I think this is the kind of book that I would maybe need to pick up when I'm in a very particular mood. Mental musings of everyday life and sort of emotionally processing a big life change such as a divorce, and this grief and adjusting to new life expectations that comes with that. I don't know that's exactly the place I was in when I picked this book up, so I recognize its merits, but it wasn't like a really stunning read for me. The next book I read is The Trick is to Keep Breathing by Janice Galloway, which is one of the few books that I own. This is a very interesting book. I have a lot to say about this book. I picked this up while I was in Scotland. It was put up on display as a Scottish classic, so I picked it up pretty much knowing nothing other than that, and it did take me, I'm not sure, probably 3 solid months to get through this. This book was very surprising. It's something different than anything I've ever read before, and this book is about a woman, first person perspective, and really we're following the mundane, day-to-day, monotonous tasks of her life in the wake of some deaths that she has experienced, which have left her very depressed and desperate to know what to do with her life. She is very much grappling for meaning in her existence. She lives in a creaky old house, and she is a teacher, and she works at the races on the weekends, and we really just follow her from day to day to day. It is repetitive and mundane, and it is it goes on and on and on. Like, reading this book kind of felt like trudging through mud. I know that's not a compelling description. The writing style really mimics the idea of the book. This character doesn't understand, what is she supposed to be doing with her life? What is the point of anything? That kind of mental processing of just constantly feeling unfulfilled and lacking any understanding for your existence is a very mundane mentality, and so the writing style in its repetition just sort of drives that force home. This book is also very interesting in its use of form. She sort of has like lists of things to do in the evening, because she doesn't have she's so desperate for understanding what to do with her life that she has like a list of things to do in the evening. There are these writings in the margin like this. You can just see sometimes. This one has much more than normal. This happens every few pages. Something that I found very interesting about this book is that it is in first person, and the narrator, bogged down by this depression and grief, feels very distant and very much like she's just not coping with life, and also hitting social barriers as well because of that she can't interact very well. As the book goes on, there are ways that as a narrator she evolves, and we begin to see the way that she's talking about her life and about herself evolving as well. And although the book is so repetitive and sort of mundane and day to day, we slowly see this unfolding of our protagonist in a way that makes her feel like a much more complex and intelligent character, one that is more equipped to handle society, but also one that is plagued because of that. She sees it all as a dramatization. She sees the pretending, and she's able to sort of analyze the ambitions and the motivations behind social interactions that she has, which leaves her feeling like everything is inauthentic and everything is fake. It was so interesting. I really enjoyed this book. Well, I suppose enjoy would be a bit of a hard thing to say because it's also really depressing and about death. I would also give trigger warnings for self-harm and eating disorders as well, which her relationship with her body is another fascinating facet to the discussion of her evolving identity as well. This is not a really well-known book according to Goodreads, but I found it very interesting and definitely not everyone's cup of tea, but I enjoyed it quite a lot. I had to pop off for a bit, and the lighting has most definitely changed, so sorry about that. But let's carry on, shall we? The next book that I have to talk about is I Captured the Castle by Dodie Smith. This book is about a family, a small family, a dad, a stepmom, two sisters, a brother, and then Stephen, who lives with them, and a dog, and they live in this castle, and it's super run down in some little town in the UK. The dad is a washed up has-been author, and the family is stricken with poverty. This is a very hard trial for the oldest sister, but our protagonist is the middle child, Cassandra. I found her voice as a narrator enjoyable at some parts, well, at least at the beginning. The way the book began felt like a little bit of this nostalgic children. I feel like it's a bit of a preteen book, and when you're a kid and you play pretend, you play house, and you have to have some sort of trial to overcome, so you're orphans, I don't know, on some journey. I got that kind of feeling of nostalgia of this family that are so poor, but they live in this romanticized house that is this old castle. And I think it was that setup of thinking that this is a nostalgic read that ended up not sort of following through on that in the end, that was the problem that I had with the book, though I think there are other elements. The book felt inconsistent. I finished feeling like I wasn't sure that the book knew what it was trying to be, and so I couldn't respect it very much because I didn't know if the author had meant to make these choices that felt regressive in some ways, and if she was trying to be subversive by challenging the expectation of this like sentimental novel. Even if she was trying to do that, I didn't know what was accomplished by sort of degrading her characters, and the story felt torn and undecided, and like it didn't follow a progression that made sense. And I think that hitting like the 2/3 way mark, it just felt like all of the characters were making selfish decisions that I couldn't follow their motivations, especially because a lot of their selfish decisions were not even necessarily in their best interest. And furthermore, those selfish decisions end up just being miscommunications which create false tension. So really the plot of the book felt very weak to me as well. I do see where some readers could have a very different experience with this book. I feel like I've sort of fumbled through my thoughts on this book and not explained them in a very cohesive way, but that is also kind of the emotional reaction I had to this book. It wasn't awful, but I just didn't understand the appeal, and it just didn't work for me. But let's end on a high note. So the next book that I'm going to talk about, and one that I very much enjoyed, The Windows of Malabar Hill by Sujata Massey. This is the first book in the Perveen mystery series, which follows a woman who is a lawyer in 1920s Bombay. Her name is Perveen Mystery. She is an Indian woman who is an Oxford-educated lawyer. She is a very interesting protagonist for us because this is a period of colonial rule, and one in which, because of the time period, there are a lot of sexist laws and social customs and religious customs that exist in India at this time. And Bombay is a very multicultural and metropolitan area, and so there are several different cultures and religions all living in this area, and our protagonist, he's positioned in a very interesting intersection of all of these things, that as a woman, but one who is educated in the law and one who has some overall very progressive views for her time and place, she gives us a very insightful and educational and intriguing perspective. This story is a mystery, so I won't tell you too much about the plot, but just to give you a little taste. This begins with a man who has passed away, and he is a Muslim man and has 3 wives who all observe Purdah. I'm trying to remember that off the top of my head, and also hope I'm pronouncing it correctly. I'll like write it here. This is a religious practice, extreme privacy from men, and so these women don't see any men except for their husband when he was alive, and now their only contact with a man is their estate manager. And Perveen is reviewing the will and the logistics of distributing the estate and all of the assets and things like that, and notices that there are sort of some unusual decisions being made. Feeling skeptical about this, she goes to investigate, and the story kind of goes from there. So because she's a woman, she's actually able to go into their side of the house, because they live in like a segregated part of the house. She's able to like go and interview them and interact with them, and obviously like there's more that happens there, there's more high stakes to it, but that's a bit of the plot and how, you know, that direction that goes. However, there's also another subplot of Perveen's backstory, understanding some of the motivations for why she as a lawyer really wants to work to help women suffering from very sexist laws. This book surprised me in a lot of ways. I kind of thought that this was just going to be a fun mystery read, sort of a fun plot, but it ended up being extensively researched and very progressive, and a bit of historical social commentary as well, and to be just really hard-hitting in some of the things that it confronts and discusses. In all of the little details of the book, this just feels so solid and well fleshed out. I loved being introduced to these things and educated on these matters, you know, in a very informal and entertaining way. The lighting has changed again, and I'm sorry about that. I think this looks a bit better. I thought it was getting too dark, so I put on a light, and I think that was a bad choice. So hopefully this looks a bit better. Anyway, I could just ramble on about all the things I liked about it, but The Widows of Malabar Hill was a solid 5 stars for me, and if this subject matter, historical fiction, mystery, the laws and customs and religions of 1920s Bombay is interesting for you, I would recommend this one very much. And now let's talk about the sequel, which was the Satimper Moonstone. And I have mentioned this before, but I actually enjoyed this book even more. So first, the plot. Within just a few pages at the beginning of the book, I think she's hired to go to like the Free States of India. Also something I didn't know very much about. I don't know a lot about Indian history. In the Free States of India, apparently the British Empire still had quite a bit of influence, and these were individual city-states. The British government was somewhat involved with them, like in diplomatic interactions, I suppose, and she was sent to deal with a dispute on behalf of the British government. There have been a series of, let us say, suspicious deaths that Praveen enters onto this scene, and simply to resolve this dispute, but obviously there's more going on. And I really enjoyed this book for a few reasons. I thought it was a very interesting transition to sort of take her away from Bombay and to show this different side of Indian history. Once she gets to this faraway kingdom, the access to the actual castle is like a long journey, and that kind of isolation creates a different sort of tension. The elements that sort of contributed to the mystery and plot were very unique from the first book. In the first book, the family which she is helping is Muslim, while in this book they are Hindu. The women that she is helping in this castle also observe Purdah. The men who were first hired to go take care of it were rejected from entry, like the women refused to see them. So it is again this clever use of her gender and her position as a lawyer. There would be times where maybe something would happen that she would notice something but then comment that like it would be a conflict of interest for her to like further look into that, or to take sides in a certain situation. Ways that sort of place her distinctly on the lawyer side of the line rather than like a detective. She has much more of like a law and lawyer and structure tone to her, but because of that, I think it creates different kind of intellectual examinations as well, which personally I quite enjoyed. Another reason that I enjoyed this book, it was a little bit lighter on the sexist issues of the time period. There's still definitely some. The women in this book are really sort of strong and demanding characters, and they have a bit more autonomy, and Praveen as a character is also sort of on her own. And there were other elements of this book that I thought were just sort of cute or tender, and I really enjoyed that as well. A strong 5 stars from me, and like I said, I enjoyed it more than the first book in this series. I think that they work together really, really well as a series, that I wouldn't love the second book so much if it weren't also writing off the foundation that the first book gives. Anyway, that's enough of like a gushy rant from me. Overall, I think this group of books is a little bit all over the place, so hopefully there was, you know, something for everybody here. Though I didn't love all of the books that I read, The Trick is to Keep Breathing and the Praveen Mystery series, first 2 installments were really solidly enjoyable for me in very, very different ways. Anyway, thank you very much for watching this video, and I hope to have a wrap-up of the remaining books that I've read recently for you again soon. As always, thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you guys in another video. Bye!